prayer is powerful, but prayer is not magic. And the moment prayer becomes a substitute for discipline, responsibility, and order, it stops producing results and starts becoming an excuse. That statement makes people uncomfortable, not because it is wrong, but because it exposes something familiar, something many would rather not examine. The habit of asking God to do what we refuse to manage. This is not an attack on prayer. This is an exposure of misuse. Prayer was never designed to replace responsibility. Prayer was designed to align you with it. Yet many people have reversed the order. They pray instead of planning. They pray instead of correcting habits. They pray instead of building structure. They pray to relieve guilt, not to enforce change. And when nothing shifts, they assume heaven is silent. But heaven is not silent. Heaven is consistent. The kingdom does not operate on sympathy. It operates on principle. Prayer does not cancel principle. Prayer activates principle only when alignment exists. You can pray loudly. You can pray emotionally. You can pray daily and still remain stuck. Not because God ignored you, but because the system you are standing in is violated. That truth is difficult, but it is necessary. Life does not respond to desperation. Life responds to order. Prayer does not override systems. Prayer works through them. This is where many sincere people struggle. They love God. They believe deeply. They are not rebellious or lazy in the obvious sense. Yet their lives remain disorganized, inconsistent, and stagnant. They pray for change while protecting the very patterns that prevent change. Faith is not denial of process. Faith is submission to it. Real faith does not say, God will do it for me. Real faith says, I will align myself so what God has established can function through me. That is the distinction most people never learn. They confuse faith with escape. They believe prayer means exemption. They believe devotion means compensation. They believe sincerity guarantees results. It does not. Sincerity without structure produces frustration. You can be sincere and still be misaligned. You can be devoted and still be undisciplined. You can be prayerful and still be irresponsible. And God does not violate order to preserve comfort. Prayer was never meant to bypass effort. Prayer was meant to empower effort. It fuels discipline. It does not excuse its absence. When discipline is missing, prayer becomes noise instead of power. That is why some people feel spiritually active, but practically stuck. They have emotion without execution, passion without pattern, belief without consistency. They pray for clarity, but live without structure. They pray for strength, but refuse routine. They pray for change, but repeat the same behaviors. Then they call the outcome spiritual warfare. No, it is misalignment. Prayer does not correct what discipline refuses to confront. Prayer does not strengthen what neglect weakens daily. Prayer does not bless what disorder keeps dismantling. This is not cruelty. This is reality. Reality is what sets people free. There is a lie that sounds spiritual and keeps people weak. The lie says, God understands, I'll just pray about it. Yes, God understands. But understanding does not suspend consequence. Understanding does not cancel cause and effect. Understanding does not reward refusal to grow. Grace empowers responsibility. Grace does not replace it. Prayer gives access to grace. Discipline gives grace something to work through. Break that order, and frustration follows. Many prayers fail not because God is silent, but because the person praying is inconsistent. Not inconsistent in belief, but in obedience. Not inconsistent in words, but in patterns. Results follow alignment, not emotion. Prayer connects you to heaven. Discipline positions you on earth. Both are required. When one is present without the other, imbalance is inevitable. And imbalance always produces disappointment. This is the moment responsibility shifts, not to the devil, not to your past, not to circumstances, but to you. If nothing has changed, something has been avoided. If results are absent, structure is missing. If prayers feel unanswered, alignment needs inspection. That is not condemnation. That is power. Because what you can correct, you can change. Prayer ignites direction. Discipline carries it. Ignition without movement goes nowhere. Prayer is essential, but prayer alone is not enough. And the sooner that truth is embraced, the sooner frustration gives way to results. There is a reason order exists, and it has nothing to do with punishment. Order exists because power needs structure to flow. This is the part most people misunderstand. They think God withholds results when displeased. They imagine heaven responding emotionally, rewarding effort when impressed, delaying answers when offended. That mindset is comforting because it keeps responsibility vague, but it is also wrong. God does not rule by moods. Life does not respond to moods. Results are not emotional. They are structural. Prayer does not bend order. Prayer works when order is respected. That is why God does not violate systems, even for people He loves deeply. Love does not cancel law. Love establishes it. And once law is established, it governs impartially. Fire burns saints and sinners the same way. Gravity pulls the faithful and the faithless alike. Not because God is harsh, but because consistency is mercy. If God violated order every time someone prayed sincerely, the universe would collapse into chaos. Favor would become confusion. Authority would lose meaning. Life would become unpredictable. So, God does something far more loving. He teaches alignment. And prayer, at its highest function, is not begging for exceptions. It is submitting to order so power can flow without resistance. This is why many prayers feel unanswered. They are asking for outcomes without alignment. They are asking for results while remaining structurally unchanged. Prayer cannot replace order. Prayer must work through it. This truth exposes a painful reality. Many people want God's power without God's discipline. They want blessing without boundaries, results without routines, favor without formation. But power without structure destroys the vessel that carries it. That is why discipline is not optional. It is protective. Discipline is not punishment. It is preparation. When discipline is absent, prayer becomes dangerous. It asks for increase without capacity. It asks for promotion without maturity. It asks for expansion without structure. And God will not empower disorder. Not because He is withholding, but because He is preserving you. This is where responsibility becomes unavoidable. Because the question is no longer, does God hear me? The question becomes, am I aligned enough to carry what I am asking for? Prayer does not change systems. Prayer changes people so systems can respond. That is the order. Consider how often people pray for strength but avoid discipline. They want emotional reinforcement instead of physical consistency. They want motivation instead of routine. They want inspiration instead of repetition. But strength is not given to feelings. Strength is built through patterns. Prayer may ignite desire, but discipline constructs endurance. Without discipline, prayer produces excitement without transformation. That is why some people feel powerful during prayer, but weak during life. They leave the prayer moment charged, but return to habits unchanged. They pray for clarity, but live in disorder. They pray for wisdom, but refuse instruction. They pray for growth, but resist correction. Prayer cannot override what behavior keeps dismantling. Life does not negotiate with intention. Life responds to execution. And execution is the domain of discipline. This is where many people quietly sabotage themselves. They spiritualize delay. They say, I'm waiting on God, when in reality, God is waiting on structure. They call procrastination patience. They call fear discernment. They call inconsistency flexibility. But language does not change reality. If your routines are broken, prayer will not fix the outcome. If your structure is weak, prayer will not stabilize results. If your discipline is absent, prayer will not supply consistency. Because prayer does not do the work for you. Prayer positions you to do the work correctly. This is not a denial of grace. This is the design of grace. Grace empowers obedience. Grace does not excuse avoidance. Grace supplies strength. Discipline decides where that strength goes. That is why discipline is not legalism. It is wisdom. Discipline is simply agreement with order. And order is not religious. Order is universal. The same principles that govern physical progress govern spiritual outcomes. You do not grow because you desire growth. You grow because you submit to process. You do not succeed because you pray for success. You succeed because you align behavior with outcome. Prayer without discipline produces spiritual noise. Discipline without prayer produces empty striving. Both are incomplete on their own, but when they work together, progress becomes inevitable. This is where many people experience internal conflict. They feel like discipline diminishes faith. They worry that effort reduces dependence on God. They think structure contradicts spirituality. It does not. Discipline is not independence from God. Discipline is agreement with God. It is saying, I respect the order you established enough to live by it. That is worship in action. That is faith with substance. Faith is not passive. Faith is disciplined alignment with unseen order. When you remove discipline from faith, faith becomes wishful thinking. When you remove prayer from discipline, discipline becomes empty labor. But when prayer and discipline meet, authority emerges. And authority is what produces results. This is why some people seem unstoppable. Not because they pray more loudly, but because they live more aligned. Their prayers are short, but their discipline is deep. Their emotions fluctuate, but their routines do not. They do not negotiate with feelings. They do not wait for motivation. They do not rely on inspiration. They rely on structure. Prayer gives them direction. Discipline keeps them moving when emotion fails. That is the difference, and it is available to anyone willing to embrace responsibility. Not someday, not when conditions improve. Now, because alignment is not a future event, it is a present decision. Prayer opens the door. Discipline walks through it. And until both are present, frustration will continue even in the presence of faith. Scripture makes something clear that many people quietly resist. Prayer was never meant to stand on its own. From the beginning, prayer was designed to work within order, not outside it. When prayer is separated from obedience and discipline, it does not become stronger, it becomes strained. One of the clearest statements in Scripture settles this without argument. In 1 Samuel chapter 15, the prophet confronts Saul after Saul tries to cover disobedience with religious action. And Samuel says plainly, to obey is better than sacrifice. That sentence alone exposes a pattern that still exists today. Sacrifice includes prayer, it includes fasting, it includes spiritual effort, yet obedience ranks higher. Not because prayer lacks value, but because prayer cannot compensate for refusal to follow instruction. Saul's problem was not that he prayed. His problem was that he acted out of fear instead of alignment. Pressure did not change who he was. It revealed it. And prayer did not hide that revelation. It exposed it. That is a pattern. Scripture repeats again and again. Prayer does not override insecurity. Prayer reveals it. This is why discipline matters spiritually. Discipline is not personality. Discipline is agreement with order. It is saying, I will not ask God to bless what I refuse to govern. That posture determines whether prayer flows freely or meets resistance. Scripture often connects outcomes to obedience, not emotion. Isaiah makes this clear when it links willingness and obedience together before results follow. Desire alone is never enough. Many people pray themselves into willingness but never cross into obedience. Prayer awakens desire. Discipline carries desire into action. James addresses this tension directly when he warns against hearing without doing. A person can agree with truth, pray over truth, even feel convicted by truth, and still deceive themselves if action never follows. Prayer can produce emotional alignment. Discipline produces behavioral alignment. Without that shift, nothing changes. That is why James also says, faith without works is dead. Not fake dead, meaning faith can exist but remain inactive. Prayer activates faith internally. Discipline activates faith externally. When discipline is missing, faith stays theoretical. This explains why many people experience strong prayer moments without lasting results. They feel real conviction, but they build no structure. Emotion rises, then fades. Scripture never celebrates moments. It celebrates fruit. And fruit is produced by consistency, not intensity. Jesus himself confronted this contradiction when he asked why people would call him Lord but refused to do what he said. That question was not emotional, it was constitutional. Authority without obedience is contradiction. Prayer without discipline creates the same contradiction. You acknowledge God verbally while resisting him practically. Grace does not remove this standard. Grace reinforces it. Grace teaches discipline. Grace trains behavior. Prayer opens access to grace, but discipline applies what grace instructs. Grace is not permission to remain disordered. It is power to change. Throughout Scripture, prayer is never presented as a shortcut. It is presented as partnership. God supplies power. Man supplies obedience. Heaven supplies grace. Earth responds to order. When alignment exists, progress becomes natural. When it does not, frustration follows even when prayer is sincere. This is not condemnation. It is clarity. Because Scripture never centers the question on whether God is faithful. Scripture centers the question on whether man is aligned. That question is not meant to shame you. It is meant to return authority to your hands. Prayer is powerful. Scripture affirms that. But Scripture also affirms this truth without apology. Prayer alone is not enough. Alignment completes what prayer initiates. There comes a point where prayer stops being spiritual comfort and starts becoming a mirror. And most people do not like what they see when prayer begins to reflect discipline back at them. Because prayer does not only speak to God. Prayer exposes you. It exposes what you tolerate. It exposes what you delay. It exposes what you excuse. And the longer discipline is missing, the louder that exposure becomes. This is why prayer alone is not enough. Prayer can show you the problem, but discipline is the only thing that corrects it. Prayer can reveal disorder, but discipline is the only force that reorganizes life. Without discipline, prayer becomes awareness without repair. And awareness without repair is torment. That is why many people feel restless instead of renewed after prayer. They feel stirred but not strengthened, convicted but not changed. The problem is not prayer. The problem is the refusal to submit to discipline after prayer speaks. Prayer increases clarity. Discipline enforces change. One without the other creates tension. Discipline is not optional. It is not personality-based. It is not for strong Christians or serious believers. Discipline is the basic requirement for any life that wants results. Without it, prayer has no landing place. Discipline is structure. Discipline is order. Discipline is governance. And life responds to governance. You cannot pray your way out of what discipline refuses to manage. You cannot ask God to bless what you will not control. You cannot expect progress while protecting comfort. Prayer does not replace effort. Prayer demands it. The reason discipline feels heavy to many people is because they have trained themselves to negotiate with their feelings. They wait to feel motivated. They wait to feel ready. They wait to feel led. Discipline does not wait for feeling. Discipline moves regardless of emotion. That is why discipline produces results while motivation fades. Prayer may inspire you. Discipline carries you when inspiration disappears. Without discipline, prayer produces cycles, strong moments followed by weak follow-through, strong declarations followed by weak execution, strong intention followed by familiar failure. Discipline breaks cycles. Discipline does not argue. It does not explain. It does not negotiate. It shows up. It repeats. It stays. This is why disciplined people intimidate undisciplined ones. Not because they are arrogant, but because their lives expose excuses. They do not talk much. They do not promise much. They move. Prayer fills them with direction. Discipline turns direction into momentum. Without discipline, prayer increases desire faster than capacity. You begin to want more than your habits can sustain. You begin to see further than your structure can carry. That gap produces frustration, guilt, and self-accusation. People often label that feeling spiritual warfare. It is not warfare. It is exposure. Prayer is showing you what your life cannot hold. And until discipline increases, prayer will feel heavy instead of freeing. This is where many people try to negotiate. They promise God future obedience instead of present discipline. They say, I'll change later. They say, I'm still praying about it. They say, God understands. Understanding does not cancel consequence. Life responds to patterns, not intentions. Discipline is the pattern that stabilizes prayer. This is why higher levels of prayer demand higher levels of discipline. As awareness increases, structure must increase. As clarity grows, consistency must grow. Otherwise, prayer sharpens the pain of misalignment instead of producing progress. Discipline is not restriction. Discipline is alignment. It is aligning your habits with your prayers, your routines with your requests, your decisions with your declarations. Without that alignment, prayer contradicts your life, and contradiction always creates resistance. Prayer is not an escape from responsibility. Prayer is empowerment for responsibility. The more you pray sincerely, the more disciplined you must become. Not because God is demanding more, but because you are now aware of more. Discipline is how awareness becomes authority. When discipline is present, prayer becomes lighter. Prayer becomes focused. Prayer becomes effective. Because prayer is no longer carrying the weight alone. Structure is helping. Consistency is supporting. Movement is happening. That is when prayer stops feeling repetitive and starts producing results. Prayer alone is not enough. But prayer backed by discipline is unstoppable. At some point, discipline stops being something you admire and starts being something you must adopt. That point usually arrives after repeated frustration, after cycles of prayer followed by delay, after moments of clarity followed by the same outcomes. And when that point arrives, you realize something sobering. Nothing outside of you is holding you back anymore. What is missing is not prayer. What is missing is execution. Discipline is the bridge between revelation and reality. Prayer can reveal direction, but discipline is what carries direction forward when emotions fade. And emotions always fade. That is not weakness, it is human design. Which is why discipline exists. People often say they are waiting on God, but what they are really waiting on is motivation. They are waiting to feel strong enough, inspired enough, confident enough. Discipline does not wait for any of that. Discipline acts because it has already decided. Decision is the birthplace of discipline. Once something is decided, discipline enforces it daily. Without decision, prayer remains a discussion. With decision, prayer becomes fuel. This is why disciplined people move differently. They do not need constant encouragement. They do not need repeated confirmation. They are not waiting for signs. They have already settled the matter internally. Prayer helps them decide. Discipline keeps them moving. This is where many people struggle. They want prayer to keep deciding for them. They want repeated reassurance. They want comfort before commitment. But life does not reward hesitation. Life rewards consistency. Discipline does not care how you feel today. Discipline only cares about alignment. This is why discipline feels uncomfortable at first. It confronts habits you protected for years. It interrupts routines you justified. It exposes time you wasted. And exposure always feels painful before it feels freeing. But without that pain, nothing changes. Prayer will often make you aware of what discipline must correct. That awareness can either lead to action or avoidance. Most frustration comes from avoidance. You know what needs to change, but you keep praying around it instead of confronting it. Prayer circles the issue. Discipline addresses it. This is where honesty matters. If prayer has increased but results have not, then discipline has not followed. That is not accusation. That is diagnosis. And diagnosis is the beginning of healing. Discipline is not dramatic. It is repetitive. It shows up when no one is watching. It does the same thing again tomorrow. It does not announce itself. That is why discipline outlasts motivation. Motivation spikes. Discipline sustains. Many people admire discipline from a distance, but resist it personally. They celebrate it in others and resent it in themselves. They call disciplined people extreme, rigid, or obsessed, when in reality, those people are simply aligned. Alignment always looks extreme to disorder. Prayer does not make you disciplined automatically. prayer makes discipline necessary. The more clearly you see, the more accountable you become. Ignorance allows disorder. Awareness demands structure. That is why higher levels of prayer demand higher levels of discipline. You cannot pray for more clarity and keep living casually. You cannot ask for growth and keep avoiding structure. You cannot seek purpose and resist process. Discipline is how purpose survives contact with reality. This is where many people quit, not because they lack faith, but because discipline exposes how serious change really is. It costs comfort. It costs excuses. It costs familiarity, but it also produces freedom. Discipline gives prayer something solid to work through. It turns intention into habit. It turns desire into pattern. It turns belief into behavior. Without discipline, prayer feels like effort with no traction. With discipline, prayer feels like alignment with momentum. That is the difference. Scripture hints at this reality when it connects endurance to training, faithfulness to stewardship, and growth to consistency. It never celebrates talent without discipline. It never honors desire without obedience. It never rewards prayer without alignment. This is not because God is strict. It is because life is structured. Order is mercy. Structure is protection. Discipline protects you from self-sabotage. It protects you from emotional decisions. It protects you from inconsistency. And most importantly, it protects your prayers from being wasted. Many prayers die because discipline never carried them forward. People pray for peace but keep chaos in their schedules. They pray for provision but live without stewardship. They pray for strength but refuse routine. Discipline closes the gap between prayer and outcome. This is why discipline must be daily, not occasional, not seasonal, not emotional, daily. Because life does not respond to what you do sometimes, it responds to what you do consistently. Consistency is not exciting, but it is effective. Prayer ignites vision. Discipline sustains it. Without discipline, vision collapses under pressure. With discipline, vision becomes inevitable. That is why disciplined people seem unshakable. Not because they feel strong all the time, but because they are governed by decisions, not emotions. They do not ask themselves every day if they feel like showing up. They show up because it is who they decided to be. Prayer helped them decide. Discipline keeps that decision alive. This is the turning point. Either prayer remains an emotional experience, or prayer becomes a force partnered with discipline. One produces cycles, the other produces results. Prayer alone is not enough, but prayer enforced by discipline cannot remain unfruitful. When discipline enters, excuses leave. When discipline stays, results follow. And once discipline becomes your language, prayer finally finds its strength. Indiscipline is not a small flaw. It is not a personality quirk. It is not something prayer eventually covers. Indiscipline is a silent destroyer. It does not announce itself loudly. It erodes slowly. And by the time people notice the damage, they are usually confused about how they got there. Indiscipline wastes effort. You can pray sincerely and still lose years. Not because God was absent, but because structure was missing. Indiscipline leaks energy. It drains momentum. It turns strong, starts into weak finishes. That is why many people are exhausted without being productive. They are busy but not effective. They are active but not advancing. Indiscipline creates motion without progress. Indiscipline also breeds inconsistency, and inconsistency is deadly to results. Life does not reward what appears occasionally. Life rewards what shows up consistently. Indiscipline turns discipline into a mood instead of a standard. You act when you feel like it, you stop when resistance shows up. Over time, that pattern trains failure, and prayer does not interrupt that training. Prayer does not undo habits you keep repeating. Prayer does not cancel patterns you refuse to confront. Indiscipline also weakens authority. You lose credibility with yourself before you ever lose it with others. You stop trusting your own decisions. You stop believing your own words. You make declarations you do not keep, and slowly confidence erodes. That erosion is dangerous because self-confidence is built through kept commitments. Every time you break a commitment to yourself, indiscipline takes ground. And once confidence is gone, fear becomes louder. Doubt becomes stronger. Hesitation becomes normal. Indiscipline opens the door to fear. You hesitate because you do not trust follow-through. You delay because you do not trust execution. You overpray because you underact. That is the cycle. Indiscipline also sabotages prayer itself. Prayer becomes repetitive instead of revelatory. You keep asking the same questions because you keep avoiding the same corrections. And eventually prayer feels dry, not because God withdrew, but because prayer is pointing to something you refuse to change. Indiscipline turns prayer into frustration. And here is the most dangerous effect. Indiscipline delays destiny, not destroys delays. Destiny is not lost in one decision. It is postponed through daily disorder, small compromises, unmanaged time, inconsistent habits, comfort chosen over correction. Those things stack up and years pass. People look back and say, I prayed so much. Yes, but discipline never followed. Prayer revealed the path. Indiscipline refused to walk it. That is why indiscipline is costly. It does not just affect results. It affects timing. And timing matters. Here is the final truth, and it must be said plainly. Nothing changes until discipline becomes non-negotiable. Not admired, not respected, non-negotiable. The moment discipline becomes optional, prayer is weakened. But the moment discipline becomes law in your life, prayer becomes explosive. Because now prayer and structure are working together. This is the turning point most people wait too long to reach. Discipline is the moment you stop debating and start governing. It is when you stop asking how you feel and start enforcing who you decided to become. Discipline is identity in action. And once discipline enters, something shifts internally. You stop needing constant motivation. You stop waiting for permission. You stop explaining delays. You move. That movement builds confidence. That confidence fuels courage. That courage produces momentum. Momentum changes everything. Prayer now works differently. It becomes focused, shorter, sharper, clearer. You are no longer praying in circles. You are praying with direction. Because discipline has already removed confusion. This is where authority returns. Authority over time. Authority over habits. Authority over fear. Authority over inconsistency. And authority is what produces results. Discipline does not make life easy. It makes life effective. It does not remove resistance. It makes resistance irrelevant. That is why disciplined people look calm under pressure. They are not stronger emotionally. They are stronger structurally. Their lives are ordered. Their routines are aligned. Their decisions are settled. Prayer strengthens what discipline has already arranged. And now comes the final line that separates those who change from those who don't. Prayer is not the substitute for discipline. Prayer is the reward of discipline. When discipline is present, prayer works. When discipline is absent, prayer warns. You have heard enough. You are aware enough. You are responsible enough. From this point forward, prayer cannot carry what discipline refuses to enforce. Results will follow alignment. Progress will follow order. Authority will follow consistency. Prayer alone is not enough. But prayer backed by discipline will change everything. If this message impacted you, like and subscribe, and remember to leave a comment. Share this also. You may be helping someone realign, recover, or rise above their storm. Remember, you are God's delight. God bless you.